All right, so I am Dr. Robert Johnson. I'm a dentist here in town. First of all, I want to thank you guys for coming. It's going to be hopefully awesome. The very first thing I want to say before I even get started is that I do not claim to be the world's leading expert on anything. I'm not asking you to take my word for anything that I'm talking about here. What I would ask you to do, I'm a big fan of a guy by the name of Jim Rohn. I was once accused of being a Jim Rohn evangelist by a lady on an airplane. And one of the things I love about Jim Rohn is he says, don't be a follower, be a student. So he says, don't take my word for it. Listen to me, listen to other people, think for yourself, make up your own conclusions. So a little bit about my background. I have been a dentist for 7 years. So obviously before that I went to dental school. And when I was in dental school, I realized that it was virtually impossible to learn anything there and that I was going to have to figure it out on my own. So I started reading textbooks. I read the textbook of contemporary implant dentistry, the textbook of contemporary orthodontics, the textbook of prosthodontics. I think there was about 15 of them in total. I was going to stack them up and take a picture just to see how tall it would be. And then I started to, I'd have an afternoon clinic where I didn't have a patient available, which is part of the reason you couldn't learn anything there. So I would leave. I'd take the train downtown and spend the afternoon with a periodontist or a prosthodontist. I had this idea for a while that a prosthodontist was basically a general dentist that actually knew how to do their job. So, I was working on figuring it out myself, and I thought I had done that. I thought I kind of knew what I was doing by the time I got out of there. But then I came here, and I realized that I still didn't know jack squat about anything. That we bought a practice from a guy that retired. We have a lot of older patients coming through where they had a crown and then they lost that tooth and they got a bridge and then that crapped out and they got a partial. The teeth are all crowding, they're missing half of them. Some of them their teeth have been just patched into oblivion with fillings. Like I literally said to a few people, you only think you have teeth. Like you've actually got fillings on top of your fillings. And so this is not sustainable. We're essentially flogging a dead horse here. And the only question is, are we going to pull these out one at a time or all at once? And so that was quite depressing to me. And so I went out for coffees and beers and lunches with all of the old retired dentists. And I said, how did you guys do this for 40 years? Like, this is just so depressing. And they kind of all consistently said, well, you just need to grow up basically and realize that dentistry is just buying time. These people are coming to you with a problem, but it's their problem. It isn't your problem. You didn't give it to them, and your job is just to try to do your best to help them out. But I was just constantly saying there has to be a better way, there has to be a better way, there has to be a better way. And so finally, starting in September 2012, I stumbled upon some things where I now believe that there is a better way. So that's kind of the point of this whole talk. But before I get into that, I have to give you this warning. I don't know if you guys are all familiar with this, but this is from the Matrix. There's the red pill where you wake up and you forget this ever happened and you just go back to your normal life. And then there's the blue pill where you unplug from the Matrix and you go down the rabbit hole and you learn the truth. And for me, I find my version of the truth to be kind of depressing. So I feel like I need to warn you that if you're prone to anxiety or depression, you might want to leave and just not even go there. So having said that, I'm not going to feel bad however this pans out. So my goal, the reason I'm doing this presentation is because I want to create a massive paradigm shift in the way that people think about healthcare. And I want emphasis on the word think there because I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a second, but I think that it's really important that people learn how to think about things. There's actually a really interesting TED Talk by a 13 or 14-year-old autistic kid called Forget What You Know, where he talks about the fact that Newton was at university during the plague, and so he was hiding out in his mother's attic trying to survive, and was working on some problem and ended up creating, Newtonian physics and calculus. And then he talks about Einstein too, where he couldn't get a job at a university, so he's working in a patent office, and he comes up with the theory of relativity. So his whole point was, he said, I don't want you to try to learn things, I just want you to think about things and use your own creativity and innovation to try to figure out some of the answers to these problems. So that's really, like I said, the emphasis here is going to be on thinking about these things, so I'm going to talk about that more in a second. So what I'm going to talk about now is the issues with conventional orthodontics, and some of the potential long-term negative side effects of most of the treatment that goes on there. Then I'm going to talk about the better way, which is an alternative idea that's based on actually understanding why people have crooked teeth in the first place and addressing the underlying cause. Then I'm going to briefly touch on tooth decay, because that is another thing that I'm going to use. Basically, what I'm hoping to accomplish here is I'm going to use dentistry and orthodontics to illustrate what I think is a pretty universal problem with most of the healthcare system. Because I see a lot of people online on TMJ forums and stuff bashing dentists and orthodontists, and I always say that I agree with them, but I want to point out that it's not just us, right? It's the whole profession. So I've got a couple of quotes here to kind of establish, the framework, the background for how I want to begin to have people think about this. So this I like. It says, what gets us into trouble is not what we don't know, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so. So, there's nothing wrong with being ignorant. We're, like I said before, I don't claim to be the world's leading expert on anything. We're all ignorant about a lot of things. But when you're wrong and you're convinced, that's a problem, right? I was reading Einstein's biography when I first found out about bioblock orthotropics, which is what most of this is going to be about. And it turns out there was actually several different physicists that should have come up with the theory of relativity before Einstein, except they couldn't accept the fact that Newtonian physics wasn't the be-all and end-all, right? The next one I've got here, the point I want to make here is that wrong doesn't become right just because it's accepted by a majority. Because I think it's human nature. When you see a large group of people kind of agreeing on something, and a much smaller group saying, I don't think that's right, to say, well, those people must be wingnuts because they're obviously crazy, right? But, again, the majority used to think the world was flat and the sun revolved around the earth, and, so that's not necessarily true. And the last one, this is one of my favorite things I ever heard. It says, all truth passes through three phases. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as self-evident. So same kind of idea. Like, I don't understand why you need those first two phases. The other thing that's interesting about this is I saw a quote that was supposedly from Gandhi where he said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And I think that's even better, because the thing about this is some of what I'm going to talk about is maybe not even recognized yet. Like, it's not even being ridiculed or opposed because it's not even on the radar, right? So that's the first step, is getting some recognition. So this I like too, except I think this is wrong, because I think the right answers are actually simple, and the wrong answers are complex. And so we all seem to be trying to complicate everything. We're heading over there. But the right answers are much more simple. So why is conventional orthodontics so bad for you? Quite simply, this is a quote I stole from a guy in Chicago. A child with crooked teeth is a sick child. Crooked teeth is a symptom of poor health. So you can't. So the problem with orthodontics is you've got crooked teeth. You go to the orthodontist. They don't really know why your teeth are crooked, but they're going to straighten them. And in the process of straightening them, they do, I believe, quite a bit of damage to the growth and development of your face. So we're going to talk about that. So this I thought was pretty funny when I saw it. I don't know if you can read that. You should be able to. It says, this drug won't help, but its side effects will put your problem to shame. So, I think if this was going to be done for orthodontists, it would say, these braces will temporarily straighten your teeth, but in the process, it'll do so much damage to the growth and development of your face that you'll end up with TMJ problems and sleep apnea and a whole bunch of other chronic diseases and eventually wish you were never born. So this is a picture of me, obviously, and I don't. I think part of the problem is that people think that this looks like a normal human being. I saw a quote from John Mew where he said, the reason why people don't really understand what's going on is because we don't realize how far off we are from the true human norm. So the problem is more obvious, I think, from the side view. So if you look at me there, I've got no chin and a giant nose and a sloped forehead and really horrible posture. And I always just kind of thought that was just my lot in life. Like, that's just the way I was born. Like, you can't be charming, hilarious, a genius, and good looking, because that wouldn't be fair, right? So I just figured, that's the way the cookie crumbles. So I put this in here because this is kind of where like I said at the beginning, I was constantly walking around thinking to myself, there's got to be a better way, like, what is wrong with these people, how can I help them? And one day I heard something on the radio, I think, or maybe I read it online, about posture and how if you've got good posture, you should be able to stand with your heels, your butt, your shoulders, and your head against the wall. So I go stand against the wall, and of course my head is really far away. And so when I try to shove it back there, my lower jaw wants to jut forward, right? It's very uncomfortable to try to close into my normal bite. So I started cursing my orthodontist and saying, what dipshit would set somebody up so that the only way the teeth fit together is if they're a hunchback? Because, I started making a connection that obviously these things are connected, right? And it was literally a week after that one of my wife's classmates from dental school was out visiting, and he talked about how he was about to head down to this course in Los Angeles on this treatment called BioBlock Orthotropics, and he told me a bit about it. And it was starting in like 2 weeks, and obviously I had to be there. So this is just something I don't want to get too technical on things here, but I want to show you this. Because what this is, so orthodontists do what they call Ceph analysis, right? So they take an X-ray of your head, they mark out some points, they measure distances and angles and things, and they try to decide, you've got this kid who's buck-toothed, right? Their upper teeth are in front of their lower teeth. So they call that a class 2 malocclusion. But what you need to figure out is, why is that happening? Is the upper jaw too far forward? Is the lower jaw too far back? Is it both? Is it not a skeletal problem at all? It's only the teeth that are messed up. So they're trying to figure this out, right? So what this is showing, I hope I can point to this here. In like 1982 or 3, this guy named McNamara, whose name is up there, he did a study where he said that in the majority of these class 2 cases, the maxilla, which is the upper jaw, is not too far forward. It's either okay or it's actually too far back. And that is based on this line. This is called the McNamara vertical. So this A point here is what this is all talking about. So this is what John Mew, I'm going to talk about John Mew in a second. John Mew put this together. So this is what John Mew is saying a human face is supposed to look like based on our ancestors. And so according to John Mew, A point is supposed to be way up there. And based on the McNamara line, which is already a centimeter further back, the maxilla is not too far forward according to orthodontists. But yet, they have no way of getting the lower jaw to come forward, so all of their treatment is designed to try to hold the upper jaw back or even extract some teeth and retract things. So it's just completely ass-backwards treatment is really what it is. Like, it's literally completely backwards. It's moving the total wrong direction. So this is another diagram of John's where he shows, a human being is supposed to look like the one on the left, but most people look like the one on the right. So their upper jaw has dropped down too far in their face. It's caused the lower jaw to rotate down and back. To compensate for that so that you can still breathe, you tip your head forward. And so that is how most of us actually look, which is not conducive to being a healthy, pain-free human being on planet Earth. So simply put, the teeth are part of the jaws are part of the head is part of the body. They all function harmoniously with one another in health. So that's kind of the whole idea, right? It's connected, obviously. And we're not just treating teeth, we're treating a body. So if you put the teeth in the wrong place and you hold them there, you're going to cause compensations in the TMJ, C-spine, and lumbar spine. So it's really remarkable how much human beings can compensate for things and still be relatively, okay. It's interesting if you actually go and look at the textbook of contemporary orthodontics, there's a lot of before and after photos of patients that have been treated. And in most of the after photos, the kid's head is further forward and tipped back and their mouth is open because that's the only way they can breathe. So this is where I put this here. So it turns out breathing is kind of important, right? That's actually your most primal urge. You can go a few weeks without food, a few days without water, but you go 5 minutes without oxygen, you have permanent brain damage. So this is why this is a big deal, because this is a CT scan of me, and that little tiny 3 millimeter wide sliver at the back, which this shows better here, that's the airway that I have to try to breathe through in order to stay alive. So when you fall asleep and you lose the tone in your muscles, that's going to collapse, so you're not going to breathe. That's why you have sleep apnea. So this is another quote that I took from somebody. This is a little bit convoluted, but basically what it's saying is, so SDB stands for sleep disordered breathing. So this is the idea that, when you're awake and alert, you can breathe, but when you fall asleep and you lose the tone, your tongue drops back, you have sleep apnea. So what this is saying is that in young children, that condition is preventable, reversible, controllable, treatable. But if it's not properly addressed as a young child, it's potentially life-threatening as an adult. So that's kind of the whole point of this whole talk, is that there's a reason why the saying an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure exists. Because if you address these things as a young child, it's quite simple, and you're not going to have problems as an adult. If you screw yourself up as a child and you grow up to be an adult with a lot of problems, that's extremely complicated to try to fix. So this is something that's interesting. Establishing nasal breathing is the most important thing you can do to improve your health. There's actually a whole, I don't know if you'd call it a treatment, but there's something called buteco breathing, which is exercises and ways to retrain the way that you breathe. There's one guy in particular that has several books that I've read where he talks about the fact that, and we're going to talk about this in a second, most people actually chronically hyperventilate. Because we have our mouth open all the time, we're constantly stressed out, we're breathing too much. Our breathing volume is too high. And so when you look at somebody's airway when they're asleep, part of the reason it's going to collapse is because they're trying to suck too much air through there. There's some physics involved in like Bernoulli's principle where air that's flowing lowers the pressure and causes it to collapse. So if you're not trying to suck too much air through, even if you've got a small, pitiful airway, it's not necessarily going to collapse, and you'll be okay that way. So we're going to talk a little bit about that bit more in a second, but there's a list of the symptoms of chronic hyperventilation, which is a lot of different things, right? I mean, fatigue, nausea and IBS, restless sleep, sexual problems, anxiety, dry mouth, impaired memory or concentration. I saw a guy speaking about this in Chicago, and he had a slide where he kind of showed what happens if you're in this chronic hyperventilation state. And he went through this whole thing. He had the blood circulating around the body. It was like an animated thing. And he said, the first thing that happens is you develop high blood pressure, and then of course you put on medication for that, and then you have issues with your kidneys, and you put on medication for that, and then your liver, and then just went on and on. So he filled the whole slide with all these drugs that you're now taking. And then the only thing that was open was the upper left-hand corner. And he said, now women, you cannot diagnose a woman with sleep apnea. They're a different species from a different planet, so that is illegal. So they instead get diagnosed with depression and anxiety and fibromyalgia and chronic pain and chronic fatigue. And so he fills up that section with all the drugs for that. So that's an interesting thing too, actually. There's a TED Talk I watched on how one of the next big things we're going to have to figure out in medicine is the fact that men and women are different. The guy was talking about how people say, between any two humans, you're like 99 point something percent the same. But he said that's only true between two men or two women, because women obviously have two X chromosomes and men have an X and a Y. So between a man and a woman, it's only about the same as it is between either one and a chimp. And that has some pretty significant impact on, again, the way you present. Like what are your symptoms based on, the two can have the same underlying problem, but one of them's going to have high blood pressure, the other one's going to have depression, and how the hell do you explain that? So what's the better way? So this is the whole thing. So there is a treatment that, again, was created by a guy named John Mew, who I consider to be the Einstein of orthodontists. So it's one of my missions in life to get that guy a Nobel Prize. So if anyone knows how to do that, I'd appreciate it if you'd help me out with that. But basically, John Mew proposed this 40-something years ago. So what he says is soft foods and open mouth postures increase vertical growth, and this creates a skeletal malocclusion, the occlusal characteristics of which are determined by inherited muscle patterns. So all that's saying is basically, this is a lifestyle problem, right? Like thousands of years of human history, people did not have crooked teeth and crowding. They had room for 32 teeth in their mouth, and they were, better for it. But with the industrial and agricultural revolutions, our lifestyles have changed so much. We don't breastfeed kids for long enough. We transition to solid foods too early and wrong. We put kids in poorly designed baby furniture. We live indoors with allergies. There's a whole bunch of things that it messes up the growth and development of our face. So the second half there is the ideal development of the jaws and teeth is dependent upon correct oral posture, with the tongue resting on the palate, the lips sealed, and the teeth in light contact between 4 to 8 hours a day. So again, how you establish that in a child is a whole different question. Like there's a lot of different things that are required in doing that. The way that I explain this to people is I say to them, first of all, human beings are supposed to have 32 teeth, right? That's how many most of us are born with, or we eventually develop. But most people don't have room for their wisdom teeth. And especially anyone that's had orthodontics where they've extracted other teeth and retracted everything back and made things even worse. So if you look at a 2-year-old child, 2 to 3, they only have 20 teeth. That's how many baby teeth you get. And they go all the way to the back of your mouth. So if you're going to get 3 more molars in there at the back, which are, the 6-year molars more than a centimeter from the front to the back, you need to have a good 3 or 4 centimeters of forward development of both of your jaws. So this is a diagram that John put together where he sort of shows, if your tongue is properly placed completely in the roof of your mouth, then your face will grow properly and you'll have room for all of your teeth. If you start to have it dropping down slightly, then you'll get a little bit of crowding of your wisdom teeth. If it drops down further than that, you're going to have more crowding of all of your teeth. If you end up having it splinted out the sides between your back teeth, then you'll end up developing what they call a deep bite, where there's going to be too much overlap of your front teeth when you try to close your teeth together. That really sets you up for some potential pain and suffering. So what to look for here? So this is for young children. Like this is where I say, if you actually understand, take this to heart, do some research, make this paradigm shift that I'm hoping people will make. You're going to be like me, where you're going to want to be taking pictures of all the kids at the water slides and the mall and stuff, and then you get arrested. So basically allergic shiners is where when you're not breathing properly, you're not using your diaphragm, it doesn't allow your lymphatics to circulate properly, apparently, and especially if you're mouth breathing and you're having issues with your tonsils and adenoids, a lot of kids end up with venous pooling under their eyes, so there's dark circles there. Flaccid rolled out lower lip, that's where obviously your lower lip is, you never have your mouth closed, so it just hangs limp and rolls down. Oh yeah. Crusty lips / bozo lips. That's apparently a lot of kids will lick their lips so much that the skin around the lips gets all red and crusty. So I was going to come up with some photos to show you some of these things, but I made the mistake of Googling crusty red lips, and I can never unsee that, so I just quit after that. Accentuated Cupid's bow, that's basically the upper lip. Again, when your mouth is open all the time, this becomes more exaggerated. The upper lip is a lot more curved. The corners of the mouth drop down. Full cheeks, that is from this infantile swallowing pattern where your tongue is between your teeth when you swallow and you're using your cheek muscles to kind of swallow. That ends up overdeveloping your buccinator muscles, and you end up with fuller cheeks. Mentalis strain on lip closure, that's where some people have, if they try to close their mouth and actually bring their lips together, their chin gets all crinkly because it's like an accessory muscle they're having to recruit just to try to make that happen. I don't know what the long eyelashes thing is interesting. That's just kind of a thing people notice, that a lot of kids with tonsil and adenoid problems and allergies and stuff and nasal voices, they have long eyelashes for some reason. It's kind of a, I don't know what that's about. And then level of physical activity, that's either high or low, right? Like the whole ADD thing is, potentially that's really just a sleep problem. Like those kids are actually tired, but they've got this paradoxical reaction where they become hyper instead of sleepy. But some of them are also lazy and lethargic and sleepy. So this is the kind of thing you look at on the health history of children is, do they have allergies? How many times have they been on antibiotics? How many ear infections have they had? Again, do they have OSA? Are they snoring? Children should not snore, period. Like that is, a child who's snoring is setting themselves up for learning problems and cognitive problems, behavioral problems, and heart problems. Noisy eating, that's obviously, what someone pointed out once, they said, back in the day, parents used to say to their kids, sit up straight and close your mouth when you're chewing, right? And now kids just sit there. Like we all do that, it's crazy. So I'm going to say just 2 seconds on tooth decay, because this is another one of, again, what I'm sort of trying to do here is I want people to understand the problem and the magnitude of the problem, right? So tooth decay is interesting because this is the model for tooth decay that I learned in dental school. Basically, if you have tooth structure, bacteria, sugar, and time, and you don't get enough fluoride, that's the recipe for cavities, right? But again, that was a problem for me because there's a lot of people that brush and floss and try to do everything right. You can't figure out what's wrong with their diet. There doesn't seem to be a reason why they've got cavities. And then there are other people who don't brush and floss at all. They don't even try to look after their teeth. They drink 2 liters of Pepsi a day, and their teeth seem to be pretty resistant to decay. So there's obviously something missing out of this model. So a couple of years ago, there was a guy speaking at the Pacific Dental Conference on tooth decay, and I went to it, and I was expecting to be the only one there, but it was actually a packed house, and he was a really phenomenal speaker. But when they introduced him, they said, have you ever heard somebody say 9 out of 10 dentists recommend something and you wondered who the 10th guy was? It's this guy. And so again, like the reason I'm telling you that is because I want you to understand the magnitude of this problem. So he had a different model for tooth decay where basically the pH of your mouth is too low, so the bacteria that are going to grow in there are going to be the bad ones. They're going to every good disease has a vicious cycle. So the key is to break the cycle. So I think the best way to do that I haven't fully wrapped my head around this, but I think if you breathe through your nose and if you eat properly, which I don't know what that looks like, but I'm pretty sure it's a whole foods, plant-based diet, you won't get cavities. But if you're not going to do that, if you're not going to make radical lifestyle changes, then the next best thing I think you can do is brush your teeth with, there's a toothpaste called Remin, which has xylitol in it and other remineralization factors that is very good at preventing decay. Or he actually recommended baking soda and then supplementing that with a different product called MI paste. I've got a theory, and this is just the Robert Johnson theory, that if you got 6 grams of xylitol divided into 3 doses throughout the day, over the long term, that would change your oral flora to the point that you wouldn't get a cavity. So the take-home message of this whole thing, the thing that I want people to understand, is that correlation is not the same as causation, treatment is not the same as cure, symptoms are not the same as diseases, and normal is not the same as ideal. So that's what I sort of said at the beginning where John Mew talks about the fact that the reason why we don't really deal with these things appropriately is because we don't know what the true human norm is supposed to look like. I know I saw a guy speaking in LA and he's talking about this idea of a norm, right? Like what's an airway norm? How wide is your airway supposed to be? The different norm values that they use for these cephalometric analysis, like where do these things come from? And he showed this picture of little cartoon drawings of kids where there was a skinny kid on the left and it got fatter and fatter as it moved to the right. And he said, when I was in kindergarten, this kid on the left was normal. Today, the norm is somewhere way the hell over here. And so I actually looked up the definition of normal, and it's usual, typical, or expected. So that's a moving, if you've got a population where 95% of people have some disease, that's now normal, right? But it isn't necessarily the way it's supposed to be. So I've kind of just jokingly created what I'm calling industrial civilization syndrome, because this is just kind of all of these diseases of civilization, right? Like people, because the thing is, there's a lot of people I see on Facebook saying, oh, I've just been diagnosed with TMJ or TMD, what do I do? And TMD is this catch-all, like people have, they've either got jaw pain, they've got migraines, they've got neck problems, they've got tinnitus, and they just call it TMD, and you got these TMD specialists that are treating these people. But I think the thing is that these problems don't exist in isolation, right? It's not like everything else is great, I've got a totally awesome diet, my posture's great, I'm really healthy and fit, I breathe properly, but for some reason, I've got, my face is properly developed, I've got all my teeth, but for some reason I've got these damn wonky jaw joints that are just causing me all kinds of problems. Like that isn't how it works, right? So most people with TMD also have high blood pressure, sleep apnea. Like sleep apnea and TMD are kind of two sides of the same coin. Like I saw a quote once from John Mew where he said, TMD and OSA would not exist, that's jaw problems and sleep apnea would not exist if the maxilla and mandible were properly positioned in the face. But this is the problem with human beings. The top says, it took me a second to figure out what the hell was going on here. Who wants change? Everybody. Who wants to change? Nobody, right? And, most people have heard that Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. But I don't think people have stopped to think about the fact that that's what we do, right? So, again, Jim Rohn's version of that same idea is, for things to change for you, you've got to change. And so this is another quote that I liked. First we form our habits and then they form us. Conquer your bad habits or they'll eventually conquer you. So basically, I think this is, so this is another, this is a list of resources that I recommend checking out. It's kind of things that go hand in hand with some of the other stuff I've been talking about here. So baby-led weaning is an idea of how exactly you go about weaning a child and introducing them to solid foods. 8 steps to a pain-free back is kind of, I call it the chiropractor version of BioBlock orthotropics. It's this lady that's looked at, other cultures where they work much harder than we do. They spend the whole day bent over or sitting down and weaving and doing different things, and you'd expect them to have many more back problems, but they don't, and that's because they do those things properly, right? So when I'm talking to people about that, I always say it's how a human being is supposed to sit, stand, walk, bend over, and lie down. But a couple of those have 2 different parts. That's why there's actually 8. Protego breathing I briefly talked about earlier. That's just, again, learning how to breathe properly and less. BioBlock orthotropics, obviously we're talking about. GoPex is interesting because one of the problems with BioBlock orthotropics is that it's very difficult for the patient. There's a lot of work on their part. There's appliances where you're going to make the upper jaw wider, move the upper front teeth further forward, then you're going to train them to keep their mouth closed and hold the lower jaw forward until everything kind of remodels. And then if they've formed that habit properly, then things will proceed properly from there. But I'm actually leaving tomorrow for a course in Vancouver where I'm hoping to, I think there's some really awesome developments happening where they've got new protocols for, expanding the upper jaw using some type of forward pulling face mask thing to move the maxilla forward, and then incorporating these GoPex exercises to develop your habits. So it should make it more achievable for most people. The last one there, the Exceptional Health Company, that is a website of a guy that we saw speak in Calgary. He's actually from New Zealand. He's a self-educated health researcher. So when he was young, he had asthma and eczema and a whole bunch of health problems. And the doctors essentially told him, sorry, you're a genetically deficient human being. You're going to have to just take medication for the rest of your miserable life. And he said, that isn't good enough. and did his own research, discovered that there are centenarians in the world, these pockets of people that live to be 100 years old without having the chronic diseases that most of us have. So he tried to figure out what was different with them, and it was mostly diet and lifestyle factors, right? So that he's got a whole newsletter, he's got a bunch of books, like he's got a ton of information. So this is my whole thing. Like I said at the beginning, when I think about the problems as I see them and the magnitude of the problem, I find it hopeless and depressing, and I just want to learn how to live off the land and go become a hermit up on the side of the mountain. But the reason I haven't done that yet is because I've got this faint glimmer of hope, because I believe that there's a better way and that we can create it together. But that's what it's going to take. I don't think anything. I've got this friend of mine posted a thing on Facebook that said, things are not getting worse, they're just getting uncovered, and we need to hold each other close while we continue to pull back the veil. And I was kind of like, no, I think they're getting worse. In a lot of ways, right? Like, people are getting sicker, the gap between the rich and the poor is getting bigger, the middle class is shrinking, everyone is either unemployed, underemployed, or the working poor. But the thing about it is, I think Brene Brown has an awesome quote in one of her books where she says, "We are the most in-debt, obese, medicated, addicted adult cohort in U.S. history." So to me, that means things are getting worse. But on the bright side, they're getting worse for a reason, right? And so if we can figure out what that is and we can do something about it, then we can change it. But I think that has to be a grassroots movement. Like, I think if we're waiting for the healthcare system to figure it out on their own, that isn't going to happen. So, having said that, thank you very much for your attention. This is my email address. I'd really appreciate it if anyone would get a hold of me, and we can start a movement.